Guys, this is Dawood from AutoMarketplace. Thanks for joining us. Today, we have Benjamin Stein joining us to primarily talk about electric vehicle charging infrastructure, which is a big topic these days, and how he's thinking about the future of EVs in NYC, and especially related to the for-hire transportation industry. But so thanks for joining us, Ben, number one. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
And so before we start on EV charging, which is going to be the main topic and what a lot of people are going to be interested in, I think people are going to be interested to know that you were one of the first 350 people, one of the first 350 employees at Uber. Is that right?
That is correct. Yep.
So now, I guess now Uber has become a verb. It's worth over, 130 billion. Who knows what the value is going to be ultimately. How was it in those early days when you joined Uber? And, you don't have to get super deep into it, but I think a lot of people are just going to be intrigued by that, given you joined so early.
Yeah, the early days were incredibly fun. I worked with amazing people. We met thousands of drivers. My job was principally driver focused. We split the business internally in terms of management, in terms of rider focus and driver focus. I was on the driver team, and just meeting all those drivers was a really incredible experience. You got to see just a whole other side of New York. Ground transportation is a very New York business, and so it just kind of deepened my roots as a New Yorker. I grew up on Staten Island. And so just getting to know the people of New York was really fun as well. And it was a really wild ride, and each office had its own culture. And New York specifically, since we are a regulated market, we had to deal with a whole different host of problems that, say, San Francisco didn't have to deal with because they were unregulated. So they had a different tech stack, just different attitudes around ride sharing, and so we had to navigate our own operations here, and that kind of felt like we were almost our own little company here in New York, and we got to share knowledge across other regulated markets in London and Paris and all over the world. And so, not only were we super local, we got to kind of expand our point of view around the world and around the country. So
that's super interesting. How did you find out about the company so early? Like, how did you actually become one of the first 350 employees?
If I remember correctly, I somehow got like a free promo card to try Uber, and like this was one of the main strategies, was to refer your friends, and so we did this in a couple different ways. But I do remember my first Uber ride. I was out on a date with my girlfriend at the time. It was my birthday. It was raining. He said, "Oh, let me try this Uber," and this black SUV pulls up. Didn't have to walk in the rain.
At that time, it was like a luxury service. I remember that.
It was strictly Uber Black. That's right. And there was a point at which we used to do like borough promos. It was like Brooklyn Week or something like that.
Okay.
But at the time, 2013, it was Uber Black, and so this SUV rolls up, takes us home, and that was like my first magic experience. And a lot of people have this magic experience. That's what Uber did, was they grew the pie in the car service business. There were people riding executive luxury limousine and at the banks and attorneys' offices, but like your ordinary 27-year-old guy was not really calling car service. And that's what Uber did, was grow that pie. And so that kind of put Uber on my radar. And I followed up. I knew a guy from college who was working there, and that's all she wrote.
That's incredible. That's incredible. And so while you were at Uber, and there's one other thing, and then we'll move on from your time at Uber. I definitely don't want to waste your valuable time talking just about Uber. But at that time, just so people, we talk a lot of yellow cab people kind of subscribe to us. And at that time, if you could describe, because today it's kind of framed as, and, we've written about it, that, the poor yellow cab industry that got, the medallions down, and that's all true in the debt. But at that time, could you just briefly describe what was the state of the for-hire vehicle industry, and especially the yellow cab industry? Because I assume you recruited a lot of the yellow cab guys to Uber. And what was the dynamic there? Just so it's like kind of recorded for history before people forget what the status quo was.
Yeah, so in 2013, 2014, this is when Uber was really starting to ramp up. It was Uber raised a big round of financing. We were hiring very quickly. I was one of those hires. The yellow cab industry was pretty strong in 2013, 2014. But over time, Uber did, chip away at the total trips. But again, we also grew the pie. I don't know that we grew the pie in terms of people taking yellow cabs. Certainly not, right? We certainly grew the pie in terms of people who wanted black car service. But yeah, we were focused on yellow taxi, not only supporting them in the app. We actually did dispatch yellow taxis in the app at that time, and we've had various taxi programs, whether it be in the app, like I said, in the app in that time. And I think now we're back to dispatching yellow taxi.
Full
it's like
circle. Yeah, full circle.
Total full circle. But yes, we thought that yellow taxi drivers would be great partners for us on the Uber app because they were so knowledgeable, right? We used to do these city tests where drivers would come into our office and we'd ask them, what are the 4 crosstown streets to get across the park, like something very specific, something maybe I didn't even know at the time.
Yeah.
And so we were, it was kind of our own version of the knowledge, which they have in London. But yeah, we were very interested in taxi, and we thought that they would be great drivers.
No,
and some of them did come over, and some of them were lifers, and it's the cards fell as they did.
No, 100%. So now as we kind of, what were your, and this kind of leads up to electric vehicle charging infrastructure. We're taking the long road there, but I think it's important to kind of frame it. At Uber, what were you focused on? What were your roles? So the driver recruitment, but you were at Uber from, I think you were from there, correct me if I'm wrong, from 2013 to 2019. So throughout that time period, what were you doing? And then after Uber, we'll get to the next experience. You joined a fleet company. So what did you at Uber, and how did that lead to you joining a fleet company?
Good question. And so I also want to highlight, my first day at Uber, they sent me to the JFK parking lot to talk to black car drivers in the mobile lot, right? And so as you said, my principal job was driver recruitment, but we also ran a support center and a mini DMV essentially in our office. And so that was really my day job, was one, spend 5-6 hours interfacing one-on-one with drivers downstairs in our office. And then, in the late afternoon and evening, I'd go upstairs and answer 100 support tickets from drivers. So we were totally—
Oh, wow. Okay.
So we're totally focused on driver support, recruitment, onboarding, quality. Sometimes we had to deactivate drivers. There were issues. So that was my day job. But what I started to specialize in was building our leasing and rental program. And so that's what led to joining American Lease after leaving Uber. But I do my day job, and then I was trying to figure out how do we get drivers cars who can't afford their own car. And we had tried things with traditional leasing companies like Exeter and SCUSA, with Santander USA, which were really subprime lenders. I mean, I guess anyone under 700 credit scores is subprime, but there's really even a bigger spectrum under 700, right? So, and that's kind of what I think the New York City, black car leasing companies service, guys who don't have a thin credit profile, have maybe a driver's license from another country, who are just kind of getting on their feet here in New York. And so these are the companies that I partnered with here in New York: your Buggy's, Fast Track, Tower, and American Lease.
And so these names that you're mentioning, are like in the news a lot these days. They're quote unquote predatory and whatnot and all of that stuff. Not to get, dive too much into
we should
who's
talk
predatory,
about it.
yeah, I think it's important to talk about is that why I think your experience is so unique is that, and correct me if I'm framing this wrong, is that you're basically trying to get drivers into cars, whether that's whether that's kind of connecting them to lenders, so they can buy a cars, or if their credit score was so bad or they couldn't get a loan to buy a car, then you have to, then you'd arrange a rental arrangement for them. So when someone says like, well, these leases are predatory and stuff like that, how do you, not me, because I think I've written about, it a lot, but I think people would be interested because you've been on, so many sides of this. How do you think about that framing? And, these big leasing companies, are they providing a solution, or why is there so much hostility there? What's your perception of that?
I think there's hostility because people don't understand what the leasing companies actually do, the function they serve, and the options available to drivers. If you walk into a Toyota dealership and tell them that you're plating a TLC car, they're like, all right, 50% down payment, or you can't get insurance, or, they just make it super difficult for you as a driver. So guys lie. They say, oh, it's for personal use. And, they're technically committing like a financial fraud, technically, like if they're getting a car loan, right? But like, these are just working class people just trying to make it work. They just like, without a car, they don't have a job. And so that is, we're just helping people, people who wanted to join Uber, who couldn't get on the road. We directed them to leasing companies that provided a turnkey service, that they didn't have to go through the TLC plating process. They didn't have to go through this big down payment. They didn't have to lie to their lender. And the leasing company takes all the risk because, there's a lot of accidents. There is a lot that there's also guys that don't pay. But what I'll say is mostly people do pay. These are honest working folks. And but the leasing company does take on significant risk and has to put up significant capital to keep their fleet refreshed, pay their liability and physical damage insurance. So, and then the other thing I'll say, like, as in credit to Uber and maybe the program that we built, like at the time, Lincoln Town cars were renting it for, I don't know, $500-600 a week, and SUVs maybe even more. Our job was to drive that price down. Not only do we want to get people on the road, we wanted to get them in a vehicle at a competitive price. And so we were doing our best to help drivers. We were putting pressure on the leasing companies. We happened to be able to deliver the volume of people that were interested in driving for Uber, such that they were willing to cut their prices and offer different model vehicles. And so the industry changed from the Lincoln Town Car to, I mean, the Toyota Camry was kind of in the mix. I mostly in car service, but we brought it into black car. The Toyota Camry became the black.
That's actually such an, I didn't even, you're saying that, and you're actually absolutely right that you basically made the Toyota Camry like effectively the black car. You redefined the black car category essentially.
It used to be the town car, and our CEO Travis, he, for whatever reason, some people had it out against the town car. It's actually a really comfortable car to sit in the back of, but it kind of represented an old way of doing business, or just another time.
No, I mean, that's, yeah, what you're saying is totally correct. And so I think that's really interesting to get your framing, because I know a lot of drivers are like, okay, well, he's giving the leasing, the leasing pitch. But I think it's like an important truth for people to hear, where there's always another side,
Sure.
There's a difference. Yeah.
Oh,
I was going to say there's a difference between bad customer service and like something, that accusation of somebody being predatory. That's a very big accusation, basically saying someone is like being like a payday lender, when the story is much deeper than that, really.
Yeah, so you bring up the point about customer service. You know, there are times when leasing companies have to take cars back. Sometimes, I mean, I've heard stories where guys just like leave the keys on the side of the road, leave the car and the keys on the side of the road. So, you know, there's drivers that don't always treat the leasing companies or their vehicles very nicely. Sometimes they don't pay. Sometimes, yes, they have to take cars back. And those are the kind of maybe vocal minority who are really upset about it. And then, of course, there's extenuating circumstances. You can't make everybody happy, but leasing companies don't want to take cars back. They want you to keep the car. They want you to keep driving and paying. Like that's their business, is to keep cars on the road. And from a profitability standpoint, like you have to be really, really big to make any money in this business. Like you would be surprised at the profit margins per vehicle at some of the largest companies. It's kind of it's a volume game, and you know, you run a fleet, and I'm sure you can speak to that. But
That's exactly right. And that's why I actually focus on Uber Black. And because we have a very small fleet, that's where I started in this industry. And the whole thinking was, oh man, I got to buy like hundreds, if not thousands, and I have to provide financing. So let me just focus on this niche leasing business that's less hostile, that's more like chauffeur focused, where I'm providing a BMW or Escalade. And in that instance, the other pitch to that is that a driver doesn't want to buy it because of maintenance. So they'll say, well, I could buy, my credit score is actually 750. I could go to the Cadillac dealer or BMW dealership to buy this, but I would actually would prefer leasing it from you so you can take care of maintenance. So that's why I actually focused on the Uber Black market when I started.
I think that makes a lot of sense. And the other point I want to bring up is, you know, when you add up the numbers, right? You say someone's paying $350 a week for a Toyota Camry, it's expensive, right? There's no doubt it's expensive, but it does include the plates. The other thing is the opportunity cost. When you're plating a TLC car, you have to wait. I forget what it could be up to 2 months, 2 or 3 months just to get through the whole process. And so that's an opportunity cost for a driver. It could be out on the road making money renting a car, or just sitting on their couch waiting to plate their plates. But yeah, when you add up 350 for 52 weeks, it's like, whoa, you blew past the cost of a Toyota Camry, but there's all these costs baked in there. Plus, a lot of guys like to go home to their families in other countries, and you
100%.
you can't do that when you own the car. You have to find another driver, or you know, sideline your plate, or you know, pause your insurance or something like that. So there are a lot of benefits. It's not cheap, but there's always a cost and a benefit.
And I think this is a perfect number one. By the way, this discussion is like not a popular discussion. Like maybe there's like 20 people who will clap for what we're saying, and 10,000 people be like, no, I don't want to hear what he's saying. I don't want to hear the real math behind it. And you know, there is a balance for sure. And then the other thing that changed was, you know, this concept of a TLC plate becoming like a medallion, and you know, all of that stuff. But we won't focus so much on that right now. But I do want to use this, what you're saying right now, to transition to a discussion about EVs, because it's what you're saying right now about the cost of running a leasing company, how difficult it is. After American Lease and Uber, I guess, and you can tell the story better than I can, but you've basically done kind of venture investing, and you've started different companies, and you ultimately decided, I'm like fast forwarding this, but you know, feel free to pick it apart. You've decided that you're going to focus now on EVs and EV charging infrastructure. Could you explain how you came to that conclusion? That, you know, you have such an interesting perspective. You work for Uber, you work for this fleet company, you've seen a lot of different startups. How did you determine that, okay, I want to focus on EVs and EV charging infrastructure in New York City? Like, what do you see there?
Yeah. So as you pointed out, I've tried to deepen my focus and knowledge in the transportation industry. And even leaving American Lease, I became what's called an entrepreneur in residence, where you do essentially like early stage venture building. You're testing different ideas, seeing what has traction. And so I did a project for a bank that was around the vehicle as a payment method, which is kind of a far out idea. And then we did another startup that was cyber insurance for commercial vehicles, which was even way, you know, futuristic and maybe definitely a bit too ahead of its time, but you know, had kind of an insurance focus, which is a big part of transportation industry. And so like as an entrepreneur in residence, I was thinking about what kind of business I wanted to start for myself. And I thought, you know, maybe I could be like the enterprise of electric vehicles and have like an all electric rental company.
Oh, so
And
it started. I definitely so you
yeah,
actually initially focus on kind of building the American lease, if you will,
sure.
or enterprise of EVs. Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt, but I didn't know that. Interesting.
Yeah. So really the enterprise, because enterprise is retail and American Lease would be commercial. So
Oh, got
I
it.
wanted it to be a broad offering. And you know, I was thinking about using Get Around and Turo to kind of build the brand and kind of get some revenue traction. But you know, from my experience working American Lease, and you know, I came to the conclusion that just wasn't the business that I wanted to get into. Very capital intensive, very operational intensive. And so I started thinking about other ideas that were other big ideas that were in the fleet space. And there's really two in my mind. One is autonomy and the other is electrification. And electrification was more aligned with my skill set and overall goals. Um, and at the time, in this is around 2021. Yeah, let's call it 2021. I saw that New York City DOT was rolling out its curbside charging program. I also saw a Tesla charging itself at the curb from a first floor bedroom window, and they ran a cable over a tree, and that's actually called
Crazy.
Rapunzeling. That's called Rapunzeling.
Rapunzeling.
So
Oh, I've never
yeah,
heard that term. That's
you
such a great
Rapunzel
term.
the electrical cable down to the sidewalk. And I said, you know, looking at what New York City is doing and what with the lengths people are going to charge their electric cars, like, wow, we could productize what this Tesla is doing. We could pull power over the top of the sidewalk and charge cars right at the curb. And I thought that we could attach um, like home chargers, L2 chargers, to the sides of these outdoor dining sheds that had popped up during the pandemic.
Oh, interesting.
And yeah, because we had this new fixture in the street. And so I said, okay, well, we can put chargers on these fixtures and create 2 electric vehicle charging spots at the end of these sheds. And boom, we've solved the problem. Because I saw what DOT was doing. I was like, wow, this is going to be expensive. This feels like an Uber type problem, right? And so that's how I thought about attacking it. And I spoke to DCAS, I spoke to DOT, and I spoke to Con Ed, and I realized that this curbside program was really kind of an immovable force for me. Like, and there was also a procurement program that DOT had ran with New Lab, which had selected some of the vendors that you're seeing today, which I think it's Curb, It's Electric, and Volt Posts are there. There might be one other that I'm missing, and so, you know, that's really the genesis of like how I got to where I am today. Was just seeing what what New York City had done with this pilot program. I think it's 50 bollards with 2 plugs each, and they get to 100.
What's really interesting what you're saying
Yeah,
is that right now, and you know this better than anybody, we with the Green Rides initiative, and you see, you're seeing in the news that you have these 1 hour waiting lines with these superchargers. It sounds
yeah,
like from what you're saying, the way you thought the solution was more like a curbside solution. And maybe for another thing, and I know you know this, but could you explain the difference to our audience between like L2 and L3 charging and how that works?
yeah. Yeah, so it's actually L1, L2, L3, L3 being the highest powered charge,
So that's like
L1
a
being
supercharger,
that's
basically.
a supercharger, right? That's your Electrifying America, that's your Tesla 250 kilowatt charger. Your L1 charger is what you plug your like lamp into at home, right? It's basically like, 1 to 2 kilowatts. And you know, really like something like that is if you're not driving that often, that's really sufficient. You don't have to do like very many electrical upgrades. But if you want your car to be fully charged overnight, you'll need an L2 charger. And so for the TLC drivers who have access to a driveway or garage, an L2 charger is what they're looking for. For guys that live in, multifamily buildings that park on the street, they need L3 chargers. They need a charge in 30 minutes or less. And that's what Revel's offering. That's what Electrify America and Tesla are offering. And that's where you're seeing these lines build up.
So how do you think, like, with that? So, and no one knows the answer to this, but because you have that's such an interesting experience at Uber, in your estimation, what percent, this is a totally unfair question, by the way, and I'm going to ask it anyways. I'm going to ask it anyways, but what percentage, if you had to just kind of, finger in the air, what percentage of drivers actually have the ability to install an L2 charger in their house in New York City?
I'm going to take a
wild
guess at this. I think it's below 20%, but New York City has published reports on this. There are you can search for, like, there's a report called Electrifying New York, something like that. You can find this, and they've reported on this, but it is not the vast majority of people that have access to a driveway or garage. It's probably like your Pareto principle, like, kind of, maybe that's not a good analogy, but it's an 80-20 kind of thing. 80% of the drivers, are not having access to.
So are you implying, and I think I'm of the same opinion, but are you basically implying that the real solution here is L2 curbside charging, because that's kind of a middle way where, like, well, most of those drivers are still parking on the street, and so they're parking on the street overnight, so you need to have curbside charging to solve that? Or are you more of the opinion that no, the real solution is out there? Or am I just framing this incorrectly, where the solution is a mix of many things?
I don't think you're framing it incorrectly. I do think it is a mix. Like, drivers are going to need intraday fast charging in high trip density areas, and there are reports that have come out on this that have studied this. But there are 2 million cars in New York City, and 1 million cars park on the street.
Oh, what an interesting statistic. Okay, wow.
And then, you can also look at the garage inventory, and there's something like 300,000 garage spots in New York City. And then, the other issue with garages is that, they don't necessarily have the electrical capacity, or all their amperage has been used in the garage, and they need to make a major electrical upgrade to support 5 or even 10 electric vehicle chargers. But getting back to, like, the ultimate solution, we definitely need more on-street, curbside, overnight charging, L2 charging.
On that point, that you're making such a good point, because if I asked you today, how many curbside charging posts do we have in the 5 boroughs today? Isn't the answer like less than 500? Maybe I'm totally wrong on that.
I believe it's around 150 at this point. The DOT continues to roll out their curbside charging program with Flow. It's, I think, $1 overnight and $2.50 during peak hours per hour. They charge by the hour, not by consumption. Or if you go to, say, an Electrify America or Tesla, they'll charge you by how many kilowatts they deliver. It's kind of like how much gasoline they deliver.
Well, one is like time based, and one is more time based, and one is more energy
volumetric.
Volumetric based. Yeah. So if I'm like, so I'm someone who believes in electrification, you're someone who believes in electrification, and then there's this like middle discussion where it's like, if you criticize, it's kind of like sometimes the discussion goes off the rails where it's like, oh, well, you're supporting like the oil and gas industry, and you're not supporting the green rides initiative or something. And there's a lot of people in the middle who are like, no, we're supporting EVs. We understand that's the future. But it's like, if you add 10,000 EVs all of a sudden, when there's 150 street chargers, I'll put it that way. And how many level 3 chargers would you say there in the 5 boroughs?
Oh, that's also a good question. There are
roughly
less than 200 and I did study this. I did a big survey of the electric vehicle charging infrastructure, and that was one of the impetuses for like my next business ideas. I wanted to build a greenfield charging hub like what Revel was doing, because what Revel's doing ultimately, what Revel has today ultimately is not enough. It might be enough if their locations were in convenient areas for drivers, but drivers are flung all over the city, right? They go out to Newark, they go up to Westchester, like just all over the city. So we don't have enough convenient infrastructure for drivers. And I think most of Revel's infrastructure is kind of close to is more for intraday, maybe not where drivers actually live and like where they're gonna garage their cars, or park on the street. And so that's what we need. We need more overnight charging where drivers live out in like Woodside or deep Brooklyn. And that's what we don't have today.
So like if I came to you today and I said, "Hey Benjamin, help me. I'm a taxi medallion fleet. Let's say hypothetically, and I got and I want to say, okay, I want to add 500 cars in my fleet and I have a garage. How long, let's say I say, here's $100 million or whatever amount of money, right? How long does it take from start to finish to install, let's say 100 street curbside chargers, or how long does it take to like build a supercharger? Basically, I'm in a very long-winded way. I'm trying to get a sense of a timeline. Like, let's say today we started running at it and we said, okay, let's build 1,000 street chargers. Let's build 1,000 more superchargers. What does the economics of that look like, and how long does that stuff take?
Well, in terms of curbside chargers, what New York City has done, it's taken multiple years to get through comments and planning and now they're at the point of actual construction and growth. You'd have to ask Mark Simon about like how many, like what is the incremental speed at which they've been able to increase each additional charger.
Who is Mark Simon?
Mark Simon, he works for DOT and is in charge of the electric vehicle infrastructure program. Yeah, for the city. So if you want to do an L3 charger, that's going to cost essentially, could cost $100,000 a head, like per unit, and could take 18 months. 18 to 24
okay,
months.
I just want to double click on that point. So let's say today I had a parcel in Brooklyn and I said, okay, this can fit 20 superchargers.
Yeah.
It would take, if assuming the grid can handle, there's all these assumptions. Let's assume everything is there. Right. So you're saying that if I put the shovel in the ground today to build the 20 superchargers at 100,000 a pop, 20 would cost $2 million, at least $2 million, and it would take 18 months for them to go online.
Yeah,
up to 18 months for them to go online.
18 to 24 months. Yeah, and the construction is not the hard part. It's really the grid interconnection.
Yep.
It's really working with Con Ed. You've got to get in their queue, and Con Ed has a big system to maintain, and an EV charging developers is another customer. So there's no preferential treatment. If you've heard Frank Reed speak, the CEO of Revel, he would say if he could wave a magic wand, he would like to be bumped up to the front of the queue, because what EV charging developers are doing is they are bettering, they're forwarding the goals of the city. But I don't know if that's going to happen. Everyone has business to take care of.
See, the way, and we spoke about this before leading up to the podcast, is that, in New York City, the reason there's not a lot of gas stations is because the real estate is so valuable. As I'm saying stuff that you already know. And so if I'm thinking through this, and this is just how I think about it, is that even so on a level 3 charger, let's say it takes 15 minutes from 20 to 80 or whatever the charge is. So basically one supercharger, even if it's fully utilized 24/7 a day, 24 hours 7 days a week, it can basically do 3 to 4 cars an hour. there's like a
Yeah.
supply constraint in terms of if it's like
Yeah.
just perfectly utilized. And
Yeah.
and so doing that math, when you're talking, a lot of people also don't think about, you said that there's 2 million cars in New York City. A lot of
Yeah.
people sometimes think about this problem as though, oh, there's only 100,000 TLC cars. It's like, no, guys, like there's also like, 1.9 million people who just might be regular EV customers that also need charging. So
Yeah.
all this, I'm saying all of this to say, if you just mentioned Frank Rieg being able to wave a magic wand, if you were able to wave a magic wand, and maybe this is your business idea, how do you solve for this? Because someone has to solve for this. How do you envision what a solution could be to solve this problem in New York City?
Yeah, I think that it is this problem is like, it's a supply problem. And it's kind of, I believe, a similar story to Uber in a way, because what Uber did was they added reliable supply to the road so that when people opened up the app, they knew that they would be able to get an Uber in 5 minutes or less. The same thing is true for electric vehicle charging. If you want to buy an electric vehicle, you need to know that you can roll up to a charger and get a fast charge when you need it. Or you need to be able to have ample curbside charging so that when you come home from work, you can park on the street and charge your car. Or you need to be able to, park in a garage that can support, your desire to own an electric vehicle. So it's, number one, it's supply driven. Number two, I also believe the commercial drivers are going to lead the adoption because there's a real business need, right? On the commercial side, the operating costs are lower, right? There's no oil changes, no spark plugs, there's less moving parts. It can be harder to replace a Tesla bumper. I think, you have talked about that.
But that can
But
be
there are,
solved for. That can be solved for. Right?
correct. There are other models out there. Tesla may not be the workhorse electric version of the Toyota Camry. It's probably not going to be. And I don't know if we have that car yet. I think that's another discussion. Who's going to build the workhorse electric vehicle? But commercial vehicles creating the base load utilization on the infrastructure is going to help developers finance these projects. In order to get a project finance, you need to be able to show your investors that you are locked in for 15% utilization. And that's basically where you break even. And that's the hard part when
That's a really interesting stat. What do you mean by that? That at 15% utilization, that's where you break even. How would you explain that?
covers your basically your operating costs. Your rent, your insurance, your maintenance on
Oh,
the
got it.
property.
So so how long would it take? Which is interesting sometimes. So if you build like, let's say $100,000 supercharger, how long would it, and again, this is all rough. It's obviously projects dependent. How long would it take to basically recover the sunk cost of that project? And then you're saying the ongoing utilization to cover the operating costs it needs to be at least 15% utilized. Is that what you're basically saying?
Yeah, you've got to hit 15% utilization, but even at that 15% utilization, you're getting what are called demand charges. Like if all of a sudden, like say you've got 10 chargers and 10 people show up to charge at once, the utility is basically multiplying your volumetric output by say $25, right? And that's like a tax on your max strain on the grid. But say that happened in the course of 1 hour over 1 month, but your utilization for that month was 2%, right? You got stuck with this huge bill because you were unlucky to have 10 people show up at once.
Oh, that's such an interesting technical point. Okay, I see what you're
Yeah,
saying.
it is a little technical, but your question is, what's the payback period? The answer is it depends on your utilization. Most charging infrastructure is below 15% utilization throughout the country. But there are stations that do have high utilization and can pay back the project in 6, 7, 8 years. I mean, it's not a get rich quick scheme. That's
So
for sure.
just so I heard you at 6 to 8 years might be the payback time period.
It's just like any other business. It's just like any other real estate investment. You got to be in it for the long haul. And there are no silver bullets, and the industry is still growing. When I looked at developing my own hub, I was looking at the growth of the retail industry. Like, okay, like how fast are retail registrations growing in the city? Because at the time, this is about a year and a half ago, like there was like 1,500 electric, commercial electric vehicles on the road. What's the number now? It's got to be
On
8,
TLC, it's like 8,000.
Yeah.
It's like 8,000 going up to 10,000, let's say, something like
Yeah,
that.
I mean that's like a 4x in about a year and a half since I've been doing this. So that's a pretty good trend. But it's still difficult to justify investing in a property or a lease without having what's called contracted revenue, which is basically a fleet saying, hey, we're going to buy your electricity.
Oh, okay. Got it.
Because otherwise it's a field of dreams. It's like build it and they will come.
It's
And
classic.
who's investing in the field of dreams? I haven't found them yet.
So like when you like, it's really interesting to get your perspective. And I should rephrase, it's 10,000 new are coming on top of the 2,000. So let's call it maybe by 3 months, there'll be like 12 or 14,000 EV TLC cars.
We can get this number. We should publish it and we should keep track of this.
Oh, 100%. And on double click on one of your points. So when you were starting this business, it sounds like one of the things you did is you went to these garages. You mentioned, I think there's 300,000 parking spots in New York City. Is that the right number?
If my math is correct. Yeah, I did some back of the envelope math at the time. Yeah.
So when you went for your own business, when you went to these garages and say, hey guys, let me help you let me help you install chargers. I guarantee there's going to be utilization, which honestly is not that's a believable thing, knowing the industry. How did they react to you, or how did they think about that?
So yeah, that's another good question. So I am working with an electric fleet, and they are looking for new location to operate from. And so because of their operating parameters, overnight charging and garage charging is really the way to go for them. And so I've emailed and spoke to all of the biggest parking garage operators, and they're all really excited to say, hey, say, hey, yeah, we can park 20 of your cars. But when it gets down to the nuts and bolts, making the investment in the chargers is still a difficult proposition, because these garages are sometimes just managers. They don't necessarily have full control of the building or the electrical service there. And so they need to get permission. And so it's a process. I'm not saying that these garages aren't going to build these charges specifically for this fleet, but building specifically just to expand their electric vehicle charging footprint as an customer offering, I'm not seeing that. I'm not seeing people investing in charging to attract customers. It's really demand driven. It's when a customer says, hey, I want to park my electric vehicle here, that's when they meet that demand.
It's so interesting, because it kind of reminds me about your beginnings at Uber, where you made a really good point, and this is proven in the data, where you said Uber expanded the market. They basically said that there's this 300 or 400,000 trip demand that you're simply not tapping, and we're going to unleash that demand by providing the supply. So with these garages, it kind of sounds like the similar problem, where it's like, well, until we see that it's, until we see, and you can understand their perspective, well, until we see the demand, we're not going to build it. It's like, there's obviously demand there. You need to first build the charger, and 100%, it's not an unreasonable, it'll be there. Like, people will charge their cars there.
It's a classic chicken egg problem. And part of the problem is it requires investment. So you're laying out this capital to do the electrical work and buy the equipment. And sometimes you're paying subscription fees to the software providers. There's ones that don't charge you. But that's what Uber did. We paid drivers to just sit in their cars, and some of them, they wouldn't even get a trip all night, right? And that's the investment. And garages need to do the same thing. And so if I could, back to your question, if I could wave a magic wand, I would electrify every garage in New York City. The question, is it feasible?
With level 2 or level 3 chargers?
Oh, level two, because most garage parking is overnight. And most, for multifamily buildings, these cars are mostly collecting dust. Maybe they'll use it once a
So
week.
now I exactly know what a TLC driver is going to say. They're like, okay, I love your idea, but the garage is going to charge me $500 or $600 a month to park there. How would you answer that? How would you convince the garage to say this guy's only going to use this garage spot for 8 hours? Like, how does that math look? Because I think that's a hesitation there.
Yeah, I don't think garage parking, if we're kind of mixing user groups here. I'm kind of talking for yes, we could electrify the garages, but like, no, I don't know that it would work for every TLC driver. It is another cost for them, right? Most guys are parking on the street, right? They're buying a more expensive electric vehicle. Like, okay, now you want to charge $300-400 for parking and electricity. It makes their job much harder. It makes it harder for them to earn a living. So yeah, like the commercial, another commercial solution that might work for drivers is, and then might avoid some of the costs in terms of installing more level 3 chargers, is, there's this technology it's called, they're battery backed fast chargers, or battery integrated fast chargers. And so it's basically a high powered L3 charger with a small to medium sized lithium ion battery attached to it that can operate from a 208 volt plug, right? And 208 volt plug is basically what you plug your dryer into, right? A 110 volt is, your like lowest.
So would that be like a Rapunzeling situation there? Like where they would in their apartment, they have their dryer plug, and then you'd plug this in and then Rapunzel it out to the street?
Yes, if an apartment did actually have a washer dryer in there, that they would have 208, and then they could do L2 charging on the street. Most apartments probably going to have, I don't know that most people have, washer dryer, so they're doing that 110 volt down to the street. But back to these battery integrated chargers, the idea is that you avoid the electrical upgrade required for an L3 charger. You can still get L3 speed from an L2 volt plug. So a Tesla charger requires 480 volts. That is a major electrical upgrade. There's a piece of equipment called free wire. You could plug one free wire into, say, a corner of a gas station. The free wire charges battery overnight and discharges high powered energy to drivers that come through and charge during the day. And I hope I'm being clear, but you're basically avoiding this electrical upgrade. The free wire equipment allows you to just use the ordinary
is a way to kind of, you're obviously an expert at this, but how I would think about what you're saying is, you're saying that, instead of upgrading your grid to support like a supercharger, you can use the existing grid to effectively build supercharging infrastructure, essentially, or charging infrastructure without making that huge capital investment to upgrade the grid. Is that a fair way to put it?
Yeah. So the equipment is going to cost you more, but you avoid cost and time in terms of upgrading your grid connection. And right.
You said gas station, and immediately when you said that, I'm like, oh my God, driver's going to be like, no. To ask him about how come gas stations don't build superchargers or chargers. Have you had experience with that? And what does that look like in New York City?
I've had many experiences with gas stations and operators and owners. In fact, I visited over 20 gas stations in New York City, trying to do exactly what I just explained, was rent space on their lot to install one of these free wire chargers. There's also companies called X-Charge and Electric Fish and Electric Error, which use this battery integrated technology to kind of avoid this electrical upgrade. And so I went to these gas stations, and for various reasons, nobody was interested. And in my mind, I said, okay,
What
I can
did they
off.
say to you? It's just so interesting. You're saying that, like, it feels like what you're saying. I'm like, oh man, like let me run through a wall for this idea. And then you go to the people and they're like, shrug your shoulder, like, yeah, I guess what you're saying is right, but we're not going to invest in that. What are they saying to you, the gas stations?
Well, they're gas guys, and gas is a totally different business than electricity. Electricity is an extremely complicated business. Understanding what your costs are, what the tariffs are, what the incentives are, is just a totally different business than gas. And to be honest, these gas stations are pretty tight spaces. In some cases, there really wasn't a good spot to put this equipment to use up a parking space. These gas stations are pretty congested already. And in other instances, guys just weren't really interested. I wasn't able to offer them enough incentive in terms of rent to make it even worth their while. And that's just because the economics of the equipment is 150 grand. I mean, and the whole project is over 200. So
So
um,
is this a fair way to? I was talking to someone who owns a lot of taxi medallions the other day,
yeah,
and we were talking about a Revel, for example. And the way I framed it, because I have a financial background, is like, man, EV charging, like there's a demand for it, but isn't this business model just seems so difficult? A lot of people might not know this, but gas stations make their money on the convenience stores. It's
right.
just the pumping the gas is just like, okay, they buy it for whatever. I'm just making simple numbers, $1, and you pump the gas for $1.02 or something, but the money's made
Yeah.
in the convenience store. Is this a fair way to frame the EV charging business as a gas station without the convenience store? So it's like a very difficult business model, and that's why it needs so much government subsidies to drive it.
In some cases, there won't be any amenities at the charging stations, but there are the NEVI program, which is the program that is funding this national charging infrastructure, does have amenity requirements. I think Wi-Fi is one of them. I don't know if like a restroom is one of those requirements, but in some cases, yeah, there won't be amenities, but in other cases there will be. Um, like gas stations need to think about their future business. What does their future business look like? It's going to be a mix of gas and electricity, and eventually it's going to be all electricity. And so that's the pitch to these roadside stops and gas stations. Hey, diversify your business, stay relevant, attract more people to your convenience store.
And then and as we're approaching it, we could talk about this for so long, and you're obviously super knowledgeable, but I know there's a few other questions that drivers and fleets would have, and two of them that come to my mind is this: in China they have these battery swap, I think like Neo, and there's
Yeah.
this battery swapping thing, and there's a company called Ample that was gonna do an alliance with Drive Sally for battery swapping. So the question number one is, well, let me just ask that question. What do you think about battery swapping? Is it viable? What is that technology about? Or is it kind of like a distraction?
I guess hot take for me, I'm not really a huge fan of battery swapping. I don't know a whole, like I've not spent the time to really dig into like the business model and how it works, but as a layman, as like somebody who's just looking at it from the outside, it seems extremely complicated to build battery swapping technology that works across every single OEM. That just seems like it's going to require a huge amount of capital, and you're going to need the same batteries that fit into like across chassis from every single OEM. And I just don't know how it's going to work. Maybe
That's it.
they
No,
figured it.
that's a great
Yeah.
point. And on that, a sub question to that in terms of can you explain quickly the difference between, like, I think there's a Tesla charging, I forget the exact word, like there's two types of charging standards. Could you explain that to drivers? What are the two different types of charging standards, and can you convert one to the other? Like, how does that work?
Right. So you have NACS, which is the North American Charging Standard, which is what Tesla uses. And then you basically have what everyone else is using. But Ford is switching. There's a lot of OEMs that are switching over to the Tesla standard. For the Far Eastern auto manufacturers, Japanese, like Toyota, they're using something called CHAdeMO. And then there is CCS is the charging standard that is used by most North American automakers today, but they're moving over towards the Tesla standard. It's a smaller form factor. It delivers a wider range of electricity, and it's seemingly a better technology. And Tesla's open sourced it.
Yeah.
So
God, I just wanted to mention
Yeah.
that because I know that's it just popped in my head. The second question related to the first two questions I had is this concept of like technological obsolescence, or that the battery technology is incrementally Moore's law improving, if you will, where, you know, there's this term solid state batteries. So it's kind of like, okay, are we in, you know, like, how do you think through that? As this, number one, is solid state, in your opinion, is that a real thing? Is that like 5 to 10 years away? And if that comes, then how do you think of, there's so many questions around that, but how do you think about battery technology developing and how that might impact depreciation on current generation EVs, or how that impacts how we're solving for charging? It's a huge question, but kind of like maybe a simple summary is that, how is battery technology developing and what do you expect it to be 3 to 5 years from now? So let's say the question I'll ask you right now is, right now, let's say a long range Tesla gets 300 to 400 mile range. Do you think in the future it's going to be like, oh yeah, that gets 600-mile range, and can charge in 15 minutes? Or do you think that's like 10 years away?
I do think it's 10 years away, but if you look at the rate of the rollout of EV charging infrastructure, and what the need is going to be, and the improvements in battery technology, and say solid state does actually, we do actually solve that problem. We have higher energy density batteries that hold longer charges and require less charging. The two may actually meet, where we don't have to build out as much charging infrastructure as we need, and we've got this great improved battery technology. This question is a little bit above my pay grade. I don't dive too much into the battery chemistries. I focus more on the solving the supply problem. I look at solving the problem today, and battery technology doesn't move like Moore's law. Moore's law is like a doubling every 2 years.
And that's such a fair point you're making. You're saying whether the battery technology goes fast, you're still going to need fundamentally the chargers, no matter.
We're still not even close to what we're going to need. And if you look at it on a commercial scale, like we're well short in order to meet New York City's goals, and convincing drivers to switch from gas to electric. Better for the environment. It's we have a long way to go on battery technology, and it moves a lot it moves a lot slower. It's more linear, but there are some really exciting and interesting technologies out there.
So as we're hitting the 1 hour mark, and I could honestly talk to you for 3 hours, and I think a lot of people watching this will also be like, man, this guy knows a lot about this problem. So now you have a business. I want to end this by actually kind of concluding with what's your ideal customer look like today? Who are you trying to connect with these days? And what are you working on these days, basically?
Yeah, so the name of my business is Outpost Energy. We're focused on electric vehicle charging infrastructure. We want to work with either natively electric fleets that are electric from day one, or gas fleets that are looking to dabble or convert to electric, and help them with infrastructure, help them think through suppliers, help them think through all the electrical issues and incentives that they need to take care of, and help them kind of dip their toe in the water. You don't have to say, okay, we're going to convert all 100 of our fleet to electric, but I think it's going to make drivers happier. It's going to make riders happier, and I think there's going to be a financial benefit in the long run to switching to electric. So these are the kinds of people I want to connect with, is on the commercial side, trying to help fleets make this transition.
No, that makes total sense. And we're going to provide the links to how to contact you, but just so people hear it from you, how can people find you? How can people reach out to you? What's the best way?
You can find me on LinkedIn, Benjamin J. Stein, Outpost Energy. And you could also email me at ben@outpost.energy.
Well, listen, Ben, thank you so much for your time. I think very few people have your background, and very few people can talk deep on this conversation. And hopefully if you're open to it, I think we're going to talk about, this is going to be an ongoing discussion for years and years and years. So really appreciate your time today, Ben. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. This was really fun. Appreciate it.
Thanks.